So, they're telling us that it looks like we may have a fall and winter of a lot more staying at home, like we've been doing for months now. What are people doing to get prepared? Because a lot of people were caught short, and as situations may possibly get worse, some people who have never done any sort of prepping, or if you don't like that word, you can just think of it as stocking up a little bit. What are some things that you should be stocking up on just in case things take a little bit of a turn for the worse? Now, I don't want to be an alarmist. I just want people to think about if there are more of these storms with power outages that last a week or more, civil unrest that may cause there to be curfews or stores to be closed, or may make you feel unsafe to go out. If you live in an area where coronavirus is on the upswing and you're really trying to protect yourself and or family member or friend who is particularly vulnerable, for whom it would be very dangerous, so you're doing your best to limit your possible exposure. So, there are a number of reasons why you might not be able to get to the store. Certainly not on a regular basis like you're used to, or you might get to the store and see that people have started to do like panic shopping again, and they're clearing the shelves. We all remember a couple months ago when you couldn't find a roll of toilet paper because people were buying hundreds of rolls at a time, and I don't know, like, were they building like toilet paper tree forts, filling their entire garage with toilet paper? Like, I don't even know, where do you put like 1,000 rolls of toilet paper if you buy it? I don't have that kind of space, so I don't know. But clearly people were doing it because the stores, all along were saying that they were getting plenty of supplies in, more than the normal amount, but they just couldn't keep it on the shelves. So as we've seen recently, it seems the most recent thing that now you can't get your hands on are canning supplies. Now, I've been a home canner for years, on and off. Did it quite a bit when I was younger, didn't bother with it for a while, then the last few years got back into it, and so I have not a huge supply of jars, by any serious home canner's standards, but at least, for my two-person household, I have a pretty decent supply of jars. Like I mentioned in my video about the canning supply shortage that we're currently looking at, the problem is you can reuse the jars, you can reuse the rings, but you cannot reuse the lids. That is, if you're actually canning, water bath or pressure canning. Now, if you're just using your jars for dry storage of things, that's a different story. Then, as long as nothing contaminates the rings, that would compromise that, like red soft part, which actually sticks to the top of the glass jar and forms your seal. Then if you're just using them for dry storage, then that's fine. But I'm talking about being able to actually preserve food in them, as far as taking something that would not be shelf stable under normal circumstances and either water bath canning or pressure canning it, so that you don't have to worry about keeping it in a refrigerator or freezer. So, like I mentioned in that video, if you are someone who does home canning, you would want to be trying to get your hands on extra lids now, and if you need more jars, trying to get more jars as well. If you've never been a home canner and are just starting, which is one of the reasons that people believe that it's getting so hard to find jars, is that People who've never been canners before are getting interested in learning how to can, because if nothing else, these power outages have shown us that you can have a freezer full of all kinds of food, but if the power's out for a week, unless you have a generator and enough fuel to keep it running, that freezer full of food's going to go bad pretty quickly, and it's a loss of a lot of money, and more importantly, a lot of meals that potentially your family was going to eat. So for some people, the money may not be a big deal. They might be able to just go out and spend that money again to replace all of that food once the power's back on. But for a lot of us who are on a limited budget, losing a couple $100s worth of frozen food is a big deal. That represents a large part of our grocery budget. So if you can take things from the freezer and make them shelf stable by canning them, then you've taken some of the worry out of what happens during a power outage, what happens, if your refrigerator or freezer breaks. So home canning is a good idea, and I do encourage people, who are beginners or thinking about, even just considering becoming a beginner, to give it a try. Make sure you're doing it safely. Plenty of good, reliable books and information online about learning how to can, both water bath canning, which would be for basically fruits and other high acid foods, and then pressure canning for your low acid foods, like most of your vegetables, meats, beans, soups, broths. Basically, if it's not an acidic fruit type thing, chances are you would be needing to pressure can it. So most people, once they start canning, do end up learning to do both. And personally, I was someone who initially just learned water bath canning when I was young, which limited me to things like, I'm not a jelly person, so I was really never into the jelly and jam thing, which those you do with water bath canning. They have a really high sugar content, and the fruit is acidic enough that you don't have to pressure can them. But for me, I would home can applesauce. Tomatoes are probably the lowest acid produce that you can get away with. And now by the newest guidelines, a lot of people are pressure canning their tomatoes or adding citric acid to them to increase the acidity if they're just going to be water bath canning them. But I would make my own tomato sauce and water bath can it, make my applesauce, water bath can it. Once I learned how to pressure can, I have to say, I like pressure canning better. I like the added safety of knowing that it's getting to high enough temperatures to kill not just the botulism germ, bacteria, but what we worry about more, the botulism toxin, which the bacteria releases as it dies. Because boiling water will kill the germ, but the germ isn't what's going to kill you. In a can of food that wasn't properly preserved, the botulism toxin given off by the organism when it dies still remains, and that's what has to get up to 240 degrees and Fahrenheit, I'm talking. Water boils at 212, so that's why you need the addition of the pressure to get the contents of your canning jars up to that higher temperature and hold it there for that long enough period of time to ensure that the botulism toxin is actually broken down. Professionally canned foods all use the same premises, and that's why we use pressure canning for low acid foods when we do home canning. Now, enough about canning. If you want to learn more about canning, I'm not going to do a series of canning videos, at least not at this point. There are lots of people who do wonderful canning videos. Sutton's Daze, that would be Daze, D-A-Z-E. She does lots of canning videos. Linda's Pantry She does lots of canning videos. Um, you can, just look up Canning 101, and you'll see a bunch of videos come up, people teaching you the basics. So, what else? You've decided to, maybe start doing some canning to supplement what you have on hand for yourself and your family. Again, in my household, it's me, my teenage son, and my dog. So, what kind of things do I make sure that I keep on hand in the event of, call it what you will, the zombie apocalypse? In our case, when we used to joke about the zombie apocalypse, we ended up with COVID-19. But whatever the situation is that might be keeping you in a house for a prolonged period of time, and again, with these storms we recently had, with the power outages that the power companies just weren't getting resolved, what are the other things that people are talking about making sure you have on hand? And how much is reasonable to have on hand? If you've watched any of my videos, I can get off on tangents and just sort of, we could be talking about all kinds of things if I didn't jot down some notes. So, if you see me looking down, I'm referring to some notes to keep myself on track with things that you will want to have on hand, and that probably, if you don't, you should probably take an inventory of what you have in your house, and if you don't have these things, you might want to start stocking up a little bit on them. Number one is definitely water. Clean drinking water is what I'm talking about. Back to the canning. Yes, you can can water. You can water bath can jars of water. So if you have extra canning jars that you're not using, you can use them to can water and then not have to buy, you can can your tap water and not have to go buy bottled water. But if you're having a shortage of canning supplies, that might not be the best use of your jars and lids. So probably you're looking at buying bottled water. Now, just for basics, for good hydration, you would want to make sure to have basically 2 quarts or 2 liters, half a gallon, however you want to look at it, per person per day. I think at a bare minimum, you should have enough in your house for a week, preferably for a month, but at least for a week. For example, now this not counting the dog, who you have to count, but not counting the dog, just say you were 2 people, 1 week, that would be 7 gallons of water if you were each drinking half a gallon a day. Now, some people might drink more than that, but at least you're going to stay hydrated drinking that amount. You're not going to get sick from dehydration, assuming you're not out working out, sweating a lot. If you're basically staying in the house, not doing a lot of heavy physical activity. If you were doing that, you would need to obviously hydrate more. Excuse me. Okay, next. Think about how much water you have on hand, and is it enough for at least a week for your household? Next, and some of these might seem kind of like they're the same thing, but they're sort of different levels of, okay, there's mild inconvenience, I can't get to the store, versus the power's completely out and I can't even use the microwave or boil water. So those would be different types of food. So second, I put shelf-stable, ready-to-eat foods. Those would be things that you could just eat straight out of the package or can. Things that, even if maybe you would prefer them heated up, you can eat them out of the can. That would include things like canned tuna, SpaghettiOs, Chef Boyardee, like canned pasta type things. Do we prefer those things heated up? Yes, but if you have to eat them at room temperature, they're perfectly edible, they're fully cooked, and you can eat them that way. Things like peanut butter, room temperature, filling. That's where you're used to eating it. You want to have things like that on hand. Crackers, snack foods, cookies, chips, because nobody wants to be living on, peanut butter and white bread the whole time. People get cranky when you make them stick to a diet that it's bad enough they're already stressed that things are going wrong. If they're also either hungry or really just getting sick of the fact that you thought ahead and bought 25 pounds of white rice, but you didn't buy anything else to go with it, they're not going to be happy people. So make sure you do, if you can, get some shelf-stable snack foods. I, for one, I like those just cheap, those bright orange crackers, it's supposed to be cheese-flavored crackers. I don't think they taste like cheese. They're like peanut butter sandwich crackers, basically. They're supposed to be cheese-flavored crackers with peanut butter on them. You've probably seen them at the stores. They're bright orange, the crackers, and they've got peanut butter on them. They're cheap. You can get them at dollar stores. You can order them online from Walmart. You can buy them at Walmart. Pretty much anywhere that has a good junk food section is going to have those. Those happen to be a favorite of mine, and they're, like I said, relatively cheap. But you know which junk food items will put a smile on the face of your family, so have some of those. Additionally, you want to make sure you have hygiene items. Now, if there's no running water, now, I live in the country. We have a well, which runs on a pump. If you live in the city, even when the power's out, you still have water. Lucky you. Those of us who do not have city water, when the power goes out, we don't have water. So whenever there's a threat of a storm, this is just a habit of mine, I always fill up like a small bucket, large bowl with water and sit it in the bathroom sink so that it basically serves as something to give your hands a quick dip in, to give them a quick wash when you can't properly wash them until the power comes back on. Now, usually you're just talking a matter of a couple hours, but in the event that it were a longer-term power outage, you would, you don't want to waste your precious drinking water for washing. So it's not a bad idea. I also keep 2 large buckets of water that I periodically dump them because they start to get scuzzy. I dump and refill them. I keep them off to the side in my bathroom because you need them to flush the toilet. Not something everybody wants to talk about, but not being able to flush the toilet for days at a time, especially if you only have one bathroom, is a bad thing. So you definitely want to have a couple of buckets of water, and don't wait for the power to go out. Like I said, that's just a regular. In my bathroom, there are 2 buckets of water sitting there. When they start to get a little skunky looking, I dump them out, and I just refill them and sit them back there again. So that if the power goes out unexpectedly, I know at least we can flush the toilet several times. Make sure you have enough, things like baby wipes, mouthwash. They have those. I think most people buy them for camping. I've shown them in earlier videos. They're those compressed washcloths. Sometimes they call them towels, but basically they're like the size of a washcloth. Think of like a really super cheap washcloth. They get them, you see them sometimes like as a gimmicky thing for kids. They come like compressed in like a little circle, and you moisten them and they sort of open up, and they're basically like a very cheap fabric washcloth. You can buy a pack of 100 of them or 50 of them. You can reuse them a couple times, and also if you have to use them for something that you can't just rinse out easily, you can throw them away, and it's not like it was an expensive washcloth. So things like that are good to have on hand for jobs that maybe, like you want to actually give yourself a good cleaning, washing up. It might be easier to do that with an actual washcloth type thing than with baby wipes or paper towels. Also, it's a good idea to just make sure you always have a little extra in terms of shampoo, toothpaste, like I said, mouthwash, because even if you don't have running water and brushing your teeth is, you can use a little of your drinking water in a cup and get by with brushing your teeth without running water. But mouthwash in a pinch will hold you over if you don't get to brush your teeth. Deodorant. Have some extra in the house. Never hurts, especially if you can't take a shower for a couple days. Next. Next would be assuming, okay, you still have power, but you can't get to the stores. Easy to prepare foods, things that just need maybe boiling water or need to be microwaved. So that's where like your rice, your pasta, microwave type meals, those kind of things come in really handy. And there's a lot of shelf-stable things. You could think of the different brands that have like rice or pasta that already have the seasonings in it. There's also, you can buy like the 5-pound bag TVP or texturized vegetable protein, otherwise known as like vegetarian ground beef. I mean, clearly there's no ground beef in it. But it looks sort of like the texture of ground beef, and for years, it's soy-based, and it's for years been used to extend beef in places that are cutting, costs, and they will mix TVP in with beef to make it look like there's more meat. You can add TVP to chili. You can add it to tomato sauce, and it will add protein in the absence of meat, or if you're someone who is vegetarian or vegan, you can just add it to your tomato sauce, and now it looks like meat sauce. And TVP, honestly, if you buy the unflavored, it doesn't have any taste of its own. It's just going to pick up the taste of whatever you put it in. Now you can buy it flavored, but I have always just bought the unflavored. And then I add it in. You can season it like taco meat. You can season it, just put it in with your tomato sauce or put it in with your chili beans, add a little extra chili seasoning. So TVP is not a bad thing to have in, and it's dry and it's shelf stable. You rehydrate it when you're using it. For the last couple minutes, you're heating up your tomato sauce. You put a little bit in, it soaks up some of the sauce and kind of thickens up your sauce, and now it looks and tastes like meat sauce. Next. If the power is out and isn't coming back on anytime soon, you've eaten most of your stuff that you can just eat off the shelf, and people want a real cooked meal. You want to make sure you have an alternate way of cooking, whether that's a barbecue, charcoal or gas. You have to, of course, be sure that you have a few bags of charcoal or a few propane tanks if it's a propane barbecue. Otherwise, you want to have like a camp stove for cooking over a small wood fire. They have the little biomass stoves that you basically can use small twigs or wood shavings to help just keep a fire going for 15, 20 minutes so that you can cook a small meal over it. You want to make sure you have cookware that is suitable to cooking over high heat like that. Something like cast iron is perfect. A lot of our lighter weight cookware that is for use on a stovetop is not necessarily going to hold up if you try to use it over a campfire. So it's always a good idea to have one or two nice cast iron pans or a cast iron Dutch oven that you could use to cook over a stove or in your barbecue. Next, you should make sure you try to have, and this is something you might have to talk to your doctor about, but a 3-month supply of prescription medications and over-the-counter medications that you take regularly, or even ones that you just take occasionally. Make sure that you have enough that would last a few months if you weren't able to get to the pharmacy. It can become, as someone who takes medications for asthma, for bladder dysfunction as a result of the spinal cord injury I had. And for migraines, I don't even want to think about if I suddenly ran out of all of my medications. It would be disastrous, and I would end up in a hospital. And if all this other bad stuff is going on, I'm imagining the hospitals are probably pretty busy, and they're probably the last place you want to be. So having your own medications and being sure that you don't run out is really important. Next, you want to have, maybe it's time to look at and update your first aid kit. You want to have, a lot of the ones you buy, the first aid kits, are really nothing more than some Band-Aids, a couple packets of bacitracin, and maybe a couple alcohol wipes. And honestly, that's not going to get you very far. It's a good idea to buy extra gauze, make sure you have something to clean a wound, whether it's like hydrogen peroxide or sterile saline, sterile water, something that you could clean out an abrasion or a mild burn, or, obviously if it requires medical attention that you would have to go to hospital, then you have to go to a hospital. But more minor injuries that you can treat at home, you want to be sure that you have the supplies to treat them at home. So it's worth investing in having some extra bandages, a couple boxes of different sizes of Band-Aids, rolls of gauze, ace bandages, kind of things that you would need to take care of a wound long enough for it to heal. Also, you want to make sure you have stuff on hand, like some sort of antihistamine, like Benadryl, for example, for allergic reactions. It could be from anything to an insect bite to a food reaction. And again, obviously, if it's a severe reaction where you're having trouble breathing, you're going to need to get, immediate medical attention. But more minor reactions, you want to have something on hand to treat them. Also, stuff for fever, for pain, whether it's ibuprofen, acetaminophen, whatever it is that you take if you had a headache or a fever, you want to make sure you have that on hand. Also, just basic stuff like for cold symptoms, always good to have on hand. Next, this may not sound vital, but again, to keep the peace, to keep people, relaxed during a difficult time, you want to have things to do that don't necessarily require the electricity to be on. Games, like board games, cards, coloring books. Again, this depends on who's in your family. Do you have young children? Craft projects. Books, either books for you to read to the kids or books that people, assuming like me and my son, it would be books that we would be reading ourselves. Make sure you have stuff to keep people's minds off the fact that things aren't exactly normal. Anxiety is a big problem. People, right now, for months, there's been increases in complaints of people having problems with anxiety who've never had anxiety issues in their lives. We're living in stressful times, and a little diversion can be a great way of dealing with the anxiety that these type of situations can bring up for people. Next, you want to make sure that you have a supply of candles in the house. If there's no lights, you want to be able to get around the house safely. And you also want to make sure you have, this is not the time to start going dramatic and having lots of tall taper candles standing everywhere, because you're really just creating a fire hazard. You want to have container candles, or candles that you can stand with me, like you want to talk, a little extra paranoid. I'll have like a candle that's in a glass jar. That's not good enough. I don't just leave that sitting out burning. I have it sitting in, I'll sit it in one of my cooking pots so that just on the off chance that the glass cracked from leaving the candle burning too long, like say you fell asleep and the candle was still burning, or it was dark and you were leaving it on because people were still awake and walking around the house. Candles are generally only supposed to burn for not more than 3 or 4 hours at a time. You can have the glass crack when a candle burns for a long time. Shouldn't happen, but occasionally it does happen. So I always, even my candles that are in glass jars, I like to stand the glass jar in another flame-proof container, whether it's ceramic or metal or something that isn't going to catch fire if the glass jar that the candle is actually contained in were to break. If you're using little tea light candles, sit them in a jar or a glass or just something that they're not going to accidentally get knocked off the counter as someone walks by, or someone's sleeve is going to accidentally catch on fire because they don't realize that they're standing, too close to it and there's nothing between it and them. It only takes a minute to be a little extra safe, and you already have enough problems going on if you're in this type of situation. You don't need to start a fire with unsafe use of candles. Besides your candles, you want to make sure that you have matches and or lighters so that you can actually light your candles. Next, this is for those of us who live in areas where it gets cold, and I'm talking very cold. Here in the Adirondacks, every winter we usually get a snap of at least a couple weeks where the temperatures go to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, that is extremely cold. That is freeze to death cold. You want to make sure not only does everyone have plenty of warm clothing, but that you have extra blankets in the house. Ideally you have space heaters that if you have a generator you can run them off of. But again, long term, a lot of people aren't going to be able to run their generator 24 hours a day for a week. If you don't have somewhere else to be able to get to, you want to be sure that you've got sleeping bags, extra blankets, at least ways that you're not going to freeze to death in your own house. I know, not cheery to think about, but important to plan for. If you live in the South, you don't have to worry about that probably. You just have a sweater and you're probably okay. Don't forget to have the same basic supplies that kind of for yourself. Think of those kind of supplies that your pet needs. So, dry pet food, some treats for whatever species animal you have, whatever its, bedding or, requirements are. If it's like an animal that lives in some sort of cage, or if it's like a horse that lives in a stall that uses bedding. If you're not going to be able to get to, Tractor Supply to pick up bedding or wherever you get that, you want to make sure you have some of that piled up somewhere so that you would have it. For me, I have my dog, so, I always make sure that I have a couple bags of dog food in the house and a couple bags of dog treats and a couple months worth of, the flea stuff, Frontline that you put on them once a month. Just, think about what your pet's needs would be, just like you think about what your own needs would be. Sort of something that I only recently, and I did a video on buying things from itsdelish.com. That would be getting things like spices and seasonings and dehydrated vegetables and things that you can use to dress up your dishes as they start to get more boring. If we do end up doing, say, rice and beans for a couple nights in a row, or it becomes a staple meal, one night it could be seasoned like chili. One night it could be seasoned like curry. You have a ton of options if you have a well-stocked spice rack and an assortment of condiments. So that is something to keep in mind. As is, and this is something if you're not vegan or vegetarian you may not really have given much thought to, but nutritional yeast is a good thing to have on hand, a way of adding complete protein and adding some extra flavor to dishes in order to make them more palatable and, again, to add some extra protein. So you can buy nutritional yeast. I think When I bought it most recently, there was almost like a 2-year shelf life on it from when I bought it. So, not a bad thing to keep in the house. Good for you, it's a good thing to have anyway. And it has a long shelf life, so why not have some extra in case you need it as a way of adding protein and or a change of flavor into your meals. Along that line is also instant mashed potatoes. Now, I grew up where I did the Ancestry DNA test, 96% Irish. Growing up in my house, we did not have instant mashed potatoes. You did not serve anybody instant mashed potatoes. I mean, that was like the 11th commandment. I mean, thou shalt not serve instant potatoes. But as far as in the event of not having the ability to cook fresh potatoes, the quality of instant potato flakes has really come a long way. They can be made that they're not lumpy. They are affordable, and you have to think outside the box a little bit. They're not only good to be used as a side dish as mashed potatoes, but they're also an excellent thickener for gravies and stews and sauces. Some vegan cheese sauces are based on basically pureed potatoes and nutritional yeast as the base of getting that sort of consistency and flavor that would mimic a cheese sauce. Now, does it taste exactly like a cheese sauce? No, it does not. But does it give you that sort of creamy, nice sauce to put over nachos or a baked potato or some pasta? Yeah, it does. So think about keeping some instant potato flakes on hand, even if they're something that you wouldn't ordinarily use in your meals. You might be surprised by how versatile they are. They can be used for potato pancakes, to make a different, just as a change up from regular pancakes. And what else? I think I'm almost done. Yeah, just the basics are probably where you really want to stock up things that will stay shelf stable for a long time as long as you store them properly. Things like rice, beans, pasta, other grains, different kinds of flour. Right now I have all-purpose flour, cake flour, bread flour, semolina flour, corn flour, and normally I wouldn't make a point of having all those different types of flour in the house, but I want to make sure that I can make different dishes that call for those different things. You just want to make sure that those paper bags that flour is generally sold in, that's not going to keep it shelf stable for 5 years, or 2 years even. You want to transfer it into a glass or food-safe plastic container that's airtight and going to keep out moisture, rodents, insects, anything that might ruin your food supply. So not only do you want to be sure that you get your hands on things like rice and beans and grains and flours and sugar, you want to make sure that you store it properly and don't just put it aside in the containers, in the packaging that it comes in. Okay, I talked for longer than I meant to, but I hope this answers some questions about the kind of things that you want to think about keeping on hand in the event that maybe situations become difficult to get to the store, or that stores aren't as well stocked as we would like them to be. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it. And as always, thank you for taking the time to watch. I always I realize that you have plenty of YouTube videos to choose from, and I thank you for taking the time to watch mine. Have a great day.